You know, there's a saying, they named the wrong country Honduras. I can add to that, they also called the wrong president a comedian.
We had to make Ukraine do the right things. It was not an easy situation. You saw a small scene in the Oval Office. I believe now they are doing the right things, and we are trying to reach a peace agreement. To achieve a ceasefire first, and then a peace agreement.
Hello, my name is Kateryna Solyar, and there will be no usual countdown of time, because here, as in a vacuum, only one time is frozen 24 hours left. Who am I kidding? There are no 24 hours, nor any real understanding from Trump of the threats posed by Russia's war against Ukraine. Since Donald Trump came to power, I feel like I'm watching some kind of sitcom. Except, over time, it's getting fewer laughs and less applause from the audience. First, Keith Kellogg explains that when Trump mentioned ending the war in 24 hours, he didn't literally mean it would happen within those exact 24 hours and also didn't specify exactly when the countdown would begin. Then Trump himself claimed he was being a little sarcastic when he promised to end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours.
I was a bit sarcastic when I said that's exactly how it would be. What I actually meant was that I would like to settle everything. And I believe I can do it.
And now it turns out that the argument in the Oval Office was staged. Though, of course, we had no idea. As Donald Trump himself said, the confrontation with Volodymyr Zelenskyy during his visit to Washington was a method of pressuring Ukraine's leadership. This is not just speculation coming from the American media, it's a direct quote from Donald Trump himself. And once again, it reinforces the fact that we were right. The argument was not something that arose spontaneously, but rather it was a carefully planned part of a deliberate White House strategy aimed at pressuring Ukraine to be more compliant. The logical question you're probably asking now is, why is Trump admitting this now?
In Trump's original response to the question regarding the Oval Office meeting and the challenges of the negotiations, there was no mention of this being a US-orchestrated move designed to pressure Ukraine. However, this narrative is now being widely promoted and actively spread by American media, along with certain Ukrainian media. I believe this is part of an effort to shape the information landscape ahead of the upcoming talks between the United States and Russia. Similar to the recent claims made by propagandists that Ukraine has launched yet another offensive on Russia's Belgorod region, claims that, in reality, have not been confirmed by any credible sources. To me, this appears to be an attempt to add more significance to these talks, to test how far each side might be willing to go, and to create the impression that Ukraine has already been under considerable pressure, thereby raising the important question of what the next steps will be with Russia. Will there simply be a virtual handshake, or will we see further escalation in bilateral relations? Unfortunately, Ukraine has turned into a highly speculative subject, manipulated by both political camps in the United States. Similarly, European media are engaging in the same tactics, with their coverage often influenced by the sources of their funding and the particular outcomes that are considered more important to their backers. This leaves us in an extremely difficult position when it comes to the information war. As journalists, political analysts, and experts, we find ourselves left to discuss only the mere scraps that have fallen from the negotiating table, a table that, each time, is attended by only a very select group of individuals, far removed from the broader public.
And here's an interesting point, it almost seems like Trump is trying to justify himself. The fallout from that Oval Office argument was overwhelmingly negative, especially for the United States. Trump undermined his greatest asset, security. Instead of reducing nuclear tensions, his supposed goal, the debate in Europe shifted toward increasing nuclear arsenals. France, our NATO country with its own independent nuclear arsenal, proposed extending its nuclear umbrella to other European nations. This move was met with a positive response from Germany and the Baltic states, but also raised new concerns. While France's arsenal is certainly significant, it still falls short of Russia's in terms of both the overall quantity and the sophistication of its delivery systems. For decades, European nations have relied on the US nuclear deterrent against Russia. But now, with growing uncertainty, even Poland is considering developing its own nuclear weapons. South Korea's decision may prompt a similar response from Japan. The spread of nuclear weapons in a single country has the potential to trigger a chain reaction, which could eventually lead to an uncontrollable and escalating arms race among nations. Trump's track record in nuclear diplomacy has been far from successful, whether it was scrapping the Iran deal or failed negotiations with North Korea and China. The results are the opposite of what Trump claimed he wanted. Then there's another unintended consequence, one Trump didn't expect. Rumors began circulating about the potential disabling of F-16 fighter jets from U.S. intelligence and communication updates. This raised global concerns about trusting American-made weapons, as U.S. arms exports have largely replaced Russian weapons in the market. Russia's defense exports collapsed due to sanctions and changing priorities, while the U.S. filled 75% of global arms demand. But now the key question is, can the world still rely on U.S. weapons? Because American arms sales have always been backed by a predictable U.S. foreign policy. And right now, that predictability is gone. Trump is clearly flirting with Putin. Western media, citing insider reports, though still just rumors, suggest that Trump may be willing to concede parts of Ukrainian territory. For example, the New York Times recently published a report claiming that Trump is considering handing over control of the port of Odessa to Russia, territory where Russian boots have never set foot. There's also speculation that Trump and Putin could recreate a modern-day Yalta conference, where major powers redraw Europe's borders. But the real question is, how will Ukraine react? Spoiler, extremely negatively. And Europe? Spoiler, just like Ukraine. While the Odessa claim is likely fake, when it comes to Crimea, I wouldn't be so sure. According to Samava, Trump is allegedly considering recognizing Crimea as Russian territory to end the war. Informed sources claim that discussions are allegedly underway in the White House about the possibility of the United States addressing the UN with a proposal to recognize Crimea as Russian territory on an international level. It is also known that the American leader has not made a final decision on this matter and is considering other options that could be part of the terms for a potential peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine. And I would be more than happy to tell you that there is no real basis or concrete specifics behind these words, but the truth is that Trump first discussed the annexation of Ukrainian Crimea by Russia as far back as 2016. And in June 2018, he openly stated that everyone there speaks Russian, implying that, based on this, Crimea should rightfully be considered a part of Russia. This statement, by the way, came during a G7 meeting, where he also struggled to understand why Europe stood with Ukraine, and even back then, he called Ukraine the most corrupt country in the world. At least back then, we didn't owe Trump anything. Now, as you can see, there's an additional $350 billion that he wants Ukraine to repay for weapons supplied under Biden. And suddenly, I understand. This is why Trump wants compensation. Because, just like with the F-16s, he has completely destroyed the reputation of American weapons and defense manufacturers. And now, he wants Ukraine to fix that for him. Sorry, but that's not how it works. Ukraine can restore US defense manufacturers' credibility differently. And perhaps, at this point, the conversation shouldn't be with Trump, but directly with the arms companies themselves. And let's not forget, this entire discussion stems from just one staged event in the Oval Office. A single moment that sent shockwaves through international politics. But what about domestic policy? Traditionally, it gets less attention. But believe me, even Trump's own supporters weren't expecting this level of fallout. A Trump-supporting voter is now facing his wife's deportation. The couple recently got married and was returning from their honeymoon. Suddenly at the airport, border officials asked if she had US citizenship. As you can imagine, she didn't have it. The young woman stated that she was born in Peru. She remained in the United States after her visa expired during the COVID-19 pandemic. However, she had submitted all the necessary documents to obtain permanent residency and was waiting for approval. Now it seems she will have to wait from another country. Her husband admitted that he had voted for Trump because, during his campaign, Trump promised to crack down on criminal undocumented immigrants. But in reality, mass deportations have also impacted those individuals who are in the midst of obtaining legal status, further complicating their situation. Meanwhile, a social media trend is gaining popularity. Hospital staff are asked to gather together, and then only those with US citizenship are asked to stay. The result? Just a handful of people remain on camera. And no, this doesn't mean it will be easier for Americans to find jobs. It means there is about to be a staffing crisis. And what is the third consequence? Rising prices, thanks to Trump's tariffs, which have affected even the prices at his beloved McDonald's.
Right now, Trump has also shot himself in the foot. The American press is reporting that steak, along with burger patties, veal, and all similar products, will see a price increase of at least 50%. But wait, wasn't the economy minister saying that tariffs wouldn't cause prices to go up? They can. And why is the price jumping by 50%? Because calves that are born in Mexico are transported to the US for fattening. They grow into larger cows there, and then are sent to Canada for slaughter and processing before reaching the market. This means that when the calf enters the US, it faces an immediate 25% tariff. Then, when the processed meat is brought back from Canada, it is hit with yet another 25% tariff. And 25 plus 25, that's 50. As a result, prices increase by a substantial 50%. Supporters of Trump are now questioning, how can this be happening? Why is there suddenly a crisis with beef patties? Well, Trump supporters love their burgers. And now, here you go, take it, pay at the register, and sign the receipt.
But of course, you don't actually think that after this well-argued list of nearly 50 anti-achievements of Trump in the first 50 days of his new term, the US will acknowledge there's a problem with his policies, do you? Of course not. Instead, they'll just ban criticism of him altogether. Trump's critics might soon be officially classified as mentally ill. A new bill has been introduced in the US that would recognize a person as mentally unwell if they criticize Trump. 5 Republican senators from Minnesota are reportedly preparing to introduce legislation defining Trump derangement syndrome as a legitimate mental illness. This means that those who excessively criticize the US president could be officially labeled as mentally unstable. This is being reported by Newsweek. According to the publication, the current White House press secretary, Karoline Leavitt, and communications director, Stephen Chung, have repeatedly accused Trump's critics of suffering from severe cases of this so-called syndrome. Now, some Republicans are preparing to introduce a new bill that would officially classify it as a mental disorder under legal and medical guidelines. Under this proposed legislation, symptoms of the syndrome could include expressing verbal hostility toward Trump or engaging in open acts of aggression and violence directed at his supporters. However, this initiative has raised concerns among some politicians, who argue that such a law could downplay real mental health issues, suppress dissent, and limit political expression in the United States.
And Republican lawmakers intend to introduce the bill in the state Senate first. No need to rush it nationwide, let's start with the Senate. On Monday, they plan to submit it for review by the Committee on Health and Human Services. The bill specifically aims to add Trump-induced insanity syndrome to the official list of mental disorders recognized in the state. And let's be honest, if this law passes in one state, it's only a matter of time before it spreads across the country. The proposed legislation suggests that the syndrome includes a hysteria triggered by Trump, leading to an inability to distinguish between legitimate political disagreements and signs of psychological pathology in the behavior of President Donald Trump. Given the current political divide, some lawmakers believe the bill may not pass. But the fact that it has even been introduced speaks volumes about the sheer absurdity of what's happening in the US right now. Criticizing the president is no longer allowed, because if you do, you're mentally ill.
So, when they shut down Voice of America and Radio Free Europe, you didn't pay attention, and it didn't raise any red flags for you. What's even more intriguing is that, immediately, they could categorize Trump's niece, who is a licensed psychologist, as mentally ill under this classification. The fact is, Mary Trump gave her uncle, Donald Trump, 3 psychiatric diagnoses. Mary Trump is the president's niece, a licensed psychologist, and a doctor of psychology, who in 2020 published a book in which she examined the mental state of her uncle. The book is titled, Too Much and Never Enough: How My Family Created the World's Most Dangerous Man. In other words, too much and never enough: How My Family Created the World's Most Dangerous Man. What does Mary Trump write about? She claims that the US president suffers from numerous psychological issues. According to the psychologist, he meets 9 criteria for clinical narcissism. She also suggests that Trump may be suffering from antisocial personality disorder, dependent personality disorder, and a long-standing, undiagnosed learning disability, which, for decades, has severely hindered his ability to process and understand information effectively.
After the 2016 election, Putin, Kim Jong-un, and Mitch McConnell all recognized that Trump's personal history and distinct character traits made him exceptionally vulnerable to manipulation by individuals who were more intelligent, strategic, and powerful than him. Trump's psychopathology made him so limited in thinking that they could simply repeat everything he says about himself 12 times a day. He's the smartest, he's the greatest, he's the best. Repeating all of this to his face gave the aforementioned individuals everything they wanted: sending children to concentration camps, betraying allies, implementing taxes that destroy the economy, or undermining every institution that contributes to the development of democratic values in America.
Although, of course, all of this can be attributed to the fact that the mayor has personal reasons to hate her uncle. But if the law is passed, I'm afraid that she, along with the immigrants, will have to leave the United States. However, I will emphasize again that US domestic politics hardly concerns Ukraine, except for the support of Ukraine by Americans in the US. And no, they didn't begin spreading the message that we are bad to everyone around them. They simply started quietly planting in Americans' minds that we don't deserve their attention. Specifically, Americans are being told that, in reality, US citizens should not care about Ukraine because the war with Russia poses a nuclear threat, which is much more significant. So, Republicans can simultaneously criticize Biden's administration for supporting Ukraine and try to establish cooperation with Russia to act together against China. Propaganda is not just about spreading lies. It doesn't work if it tries to convince people of things they are not ready to believe. Successful propaganda always taps into existing problems. Whether it's the issue of corruption or the growing fears among Americans about social change and the possibility of war. Yet, propaganda has its weak points, as it differs from reality. At this moment, Trump's team is working to establish connections with Moscow, naively hoping that they can persuade Russia to align with them in the ongoing confrontation with China. When the Kremlin and the White House realize they won't be able to reach an agreement, and Ukraine is not going to surrender, as you can understand, old propaganda will lose its effectiveness. So, they will start coming up with new narratives. What will come of this, nobody knows. But one thing is certain: the world we once knew, with all its familiar dynamics, no longer exists in the same way. By the way, it seems that Trump and Putin didn't just choose the day for their phone call randomly.
Today marks the anniversary of Russia officially annexing the territory of Crimea, which had been occupied since 2014. It is also the day when, back in 1940, Hitler met Mussolini, and the two leaders formed their infamous alliance, shaping the course of history during World War II. Therefore, it seems to me that many parallels can be drawn between today's phone call between Putin and Trump.
So, let's wait for the next 24 hours. The countdown has already started. We'll see then.